Everybody. Welcome to another episode of Optimizing Your Success with the Mentor Project's high achieving crew. Today we have the CEO of the Mentor Project, Dr. Debbie Heiser, the number one change agent, Janice Lentz, our writer, journalist, and professor, Dr. Bruce Wiley, and our award-winning photographer, Susie Katz. And today's guest is truly special and will bring us back to our happy, happy time. And for so many, and I wish everyone, their happy time was actually their childhood, that carefree time when you're playing and you can maybe be bored a little bit and just play outside for as long as possible. And one of the iconic brands that helped to make that possible is that little red wagon called Radio Flyer. And today we have the CEO of Radio Flyer, Robert Pasin. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ruth. It's so great to be here.
We are so excited, and we just heard before we went live that Robert and Susie actually met each other through their circles with TED. Robert and I actually met through our combined circles with 100 coaches. Now, Robert had an incredible story because he is the CEO of Radio Flyer, which is actually a company that was started by his grandfather in 1917. And since he took over the helm of this great company, he has actually seen sales grow by a factor of 10. And that's because he actually committed himself to building this incredible and amazing and creative team. And we're going to talk a little bit about what he is looking for in team members and how he assembled these great people. Now, since he took over, he actually expanded the line. So it's no longer just the Radio Flyer, that red wagon that you see. He actually started tricycles and scooters and ride-ons and electric vehicles and so many other things. But there's actually something else, and it's actually in his background, which we're going to get to a little bit later. And I don't just mean his background as in his past. I mean the background as in what's behind him. So we're gonna get to all of that. So please join me in welcoming Robert Pasin. Thank you for coming to the show.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
We are so excited to have you, and everyone who's watching, let us know where you are watching from, because we definitely want to know where in the world you're from. And if you have any questions, we are going to try to answer as many as we can. Robert, tell us your story. I know you're from Chicago.
Yeah, well, as you were doing the introduction, it made me think about the very first time I visited Radio Flyer. It was when I was 5 years old, and my dad took me to work with him. And I remember that day like it was yesterday, because as we walked into the front entrance of the building and we climbed the stairs and we were saying hello to people, I was grabbing a hold of my dad's big hand with my little hand, and we walked around the factory together, and I just remember the sound of the loud punch presses and the smells of like grease and paint, factory smells, and then seeing all of those shiny red wagons on the conveyor line. And as a little kid, it seemed like some kind of magical Rube Goldberg machine, that was cranking out these little red wagons. I didn't know how it all worked. It just seemed magical. And that's really kind of the moment I started to fall in love with Radio Flyer.
It was the smell of grease.
Well, yes, actually it was. I mean, one of the things I fell in love with was making things, turning things like, steel and paint and rubber into these delightful toys.
Wow.
So just keep going?
Keep going, but I do want to tell you that Leslie Escobar is watching from Long Island. She's one of the many, many people who bought the Radio Flyer wagon for her niece and nephew. I think everyone at some point has either given it or received it. It's just such an iconic brand. And you fell in love with it at the age of 5, going with your dad, holding your tiny hand in his big hand and smelling that grease and trying to make something of it. All right. So how'd you go from that? What was the next step?
Well, I was going to fast forward to when I started my first job there. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of years later, I was 23 years old and I started my first full-time job at the company. And when I walked into my dad's office on that day in 1992, it was a little bit different. Not much had changed since the Eisenhower administration. It was, the same paint, the same desk, the same chairs, same drapes. And there was
Wow.
even this clock that was on my dad's desk that was literally stopped. And everything just felt frozen in time. And it didn't have that same magical feeling that on that first visit so many
That
years
you
earlier.
that you had, and something tells me that you are a mover and shaker because I looked you up, and you went to the University of Notre Dame, and you you were student body president. There's a certain type of person who becomes a student body
That
president,
is a certain type of person,
right? And it's
good or
not
bad.
right. It's not usually someone who's happy with status quo. These are usually people who like to just shake things up. So it sounds to me like you definitely did that. And then you came back after graduation back to Radio Flyer and it was frozen in time. And you said,
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just a sponge soaking it all in. But even in the first week of my job there, my dad said, "Hey, we've got this guy Jerry. He's here from the bank, and he wants to meet with you." And so Jerry sat me down and he just started yelling at me, saying, "You have no cash. You have no cash. Do you get the situation
"Ooh,
your company is in?" And I just said, "Well, how much cash are you supposed to have?" I mean, I was clueless. I didn't even, know how to read a financial statement. Um, so I quickly realized that the company was really in crisis.
oh, wow.
And then in the next 6 months, adding fuel to the fire, competitors came out with plastic wagons, which
Yeah.
took key sales away from our flagship wagon, the Town and Country wagon, which was a wood wagon that many people grew up with, from the 50s through the
Yeah.
80s. And it was our cash cow. Half of our sales were this one wagon. And I think when I first saw those wagons, my reaction was, "Oh shit, plastic wagons!" Like I knew it was a game changer.
I know what you're talking about. We're not going to mention that brand now. We're not going to talk about that. So you saw that. So you saw that there was a direct competitor.
Yeah, and we, the clock was ticking. Like we were running out of cash, we were running out of options, and even though I had just started at the company, I was very aware of and terrified of this old third generation business, family business curse. Shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves in three generations. Usually, the third generation messes it up, loses the business, and I'm the third generation.
Yeah.
So I was very, terrified of that idea, and I
But
knew I
but
was
but hold on,
bringing.
Robert. You
Yeah,
actually wanted to be in it because usually we don't wanna do what's the family business, right? We
that's
wanna
true.
run screaming the other way. You actually wanted in.
Yes, I did. I was when, and I didn't. I worked there summers in college and high school and everything. So I had a lot of experience with the business, knowing it was something I was really interested in and really loved.
Wow. Wow. So you definitely wanted to stay. All right. So you saw that there was a direct competitor. You saw that you were losing money and you were ripe old age of 23.
Yeah.
And what did you say to dad?
Well, I mean, I was very much of the view of like I'm a student. I need to learn, and I knew I was green. I knew I was clueless, and I knew I was inexperienced. But at the same time, I felt incredibly lucky. Like I had been handed this opportunity of being born the grandson of the guy who started Radio Flyer. And I was a history major in college. I've always loved history. I've always loved these stories of, the underdog turning things around, going, full bore on things. And I thought, well, I know I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but if I really, really commit, then maybe we can turn it around.
All
And
right.
so
So
I did.
you had Robert, you have, because I study extreme high achievers, and there's CEOs in that group, and astronauts, and Nobel Prize winners, and um, Olympians, and f- there's four things they all have in common. And you already hit on 2 of them. Actually, you hit on 3 of them. So the first one is they're intrinsically motivated to do this. You have loved this since you were 5 years old and you wanted to put things together and you like that metal on metal clanking and the smell of the grease. You knew that if you worked hard, you could make a difference. And you hit on a third one as well, which is said, I am here as a student. I am here to learn. And those are 3 of the 4 things that all extreme high achievers do, is that they realize that they tap into something. This is what they were meant to do. And when it comes from within that way, when you are hit with a challenge like a direct competitor, you don't shut your doors down. You find a way to move forward. You find a strategy that you haven't considered yet in order to move forward. And you realize that you as one person don't have all the answers and you don't know what you don't know. So without saying it, you actually said it. And, I'm sure we're going to get to that 4th one if I get you to keep talking.
Well, if the 4th one is a high IQ, that's why I went into the family business, because I don't have that one.
So, all right. So direct competitor, you're there to learn. You want it in the business. Keep going.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you mentioned, one of the things about the intrinsically motivated. I mean, one of the things that made me so motivated was, and the other thing that I was so in love with was my grandpa's story. I mean, he invented the radio flyer, and his life is really the quintessential American immigrant success story. And I had always, when I first discovered his story, when I was growing up, I did a research paper in grade school, where I talked to my parents and I interviewed people and I talked to my grandma and I learned about his story, and I was just blown away. Like, I was like, this should be a movie. He was born into this poor working class family of carpenters in northern Italy. And when he was 16 years old, he decided to go to America, and he landed in Chicago. And like so many immigrants, he just worked in any job he could find. He dug ditches, he carried railroad ties, he washed vegetables. But he had this skill, because he was from this family of carpenters, that he knew how to make things out of wood. And so he saved up enough money. He rented a small garage on the west side of Chicago, and he started making things in this workshop. I mean, Radio Flyer started in a garage.
Wow. Wow.
And he started making furniture and phonograph cabinets. And then eventually he made this wooden wagon, which really he built initially as a tool to haul things around in his workshop.
Wow.
But customers started buying more of these wagons than anything else. And he realized, okay, I'm going to focus on wagons. And that was really where he found his success. And he called the first wagon the Liberty Coaster, because the first thing he saw when he came to America was the Statue of Liberty.
Of course.
And then in the 1920s, he switched from wood to steel in order to mass produce these Little Red Wagons. And that's when he named it Radio Flyer. And one of the questions I always get is, why is the wagon called Radio Flyer? And it's because my grandpa was always trying to connect his products with the excitement and the promise and the future of this new world of America that he came to. And so he loved the radio and the airplane, the 2 coolest high-tech inventions of the time. And so he became Radio Flyer. It had nothing to do with the product other than that they were 2 cool words. So I like to say that, if he were naming it today, maybe he'd call it the Quantum AI Dronester, or something like that. But we're not going to change the name.
What an incredible immigrant story. This is unbelievable. So you found the history, and then tell me when you stepped into the big shoes that sounded like they were pretty big shoes to fill.
Yeah, well, we were in this crisis mode of our core product, this Town and Country wagon, being threatened by these new plastic wagons that had features and things that consumers wanted. So, why we had existed and why we had succeeded for 70 years. I mean, that's a long time.
Very long time.
Was really clear. And it was to make steel and wood wagons. If you came in the front door of the building then and asked somebody, what do you do here? They'd say, we stamp out steel wagons. They wouldn't say we're Radio Flyer. And it wasn't clear, should we continue to exist? A lot of businesses go out of business. Was this just running the course of it? So I started asking tons of questions to retail customers and buyers that I was talking to consumers. And I asked people, well, what does Radio Flyer mean to you? Like, when were you playing with this as a kid? What emotions does it evoke? And these really strong themes emerged, because usually the first thing people do when they hear the words radio flyer is smile.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing they do is tell a story. And there are always these stories about childhood and imagination, and the fact that their wagon was a race car or a rocket, and they were outside and the sun was in their face and the wind was in their hair. And so there was these really, really wonderful, powerful themes all about laughter, love, and warm memories. So, we started to articulate that, we don't make wagons, we bring smiles and create warm memories that last a lifetime. That's what Radio Flyer means to people. And so we really that completely changed our mindset of ourselves and unlocked all of this potential for new products.
Wow. Wow. So that was really creative. And you weren't CEO when that happened, were you?
Um, it was it was this, what I'm describing to you is over the period of the 90s, really. So
Mhm.
I did become CEO of the company at a very young age in 1997, because my dad gave me the opportunity to do it, and I think he was ready. I went in saying to my dad every day, "Let me take this problem off your hands. Let me
Wow.
take this problem off your desk. I'll deal with it." My dad was like, "Oh, okay, great." Like he'd already
Wow.
been there a long time, so he was ready to give it over, and he was very, very generous with giving me a ton of um, opportunity to make a lot of mistakes and try a lot of things.
So you were fresh out of grad school.
Yeah, I was going to grad school at night in the 90s.
Wow. And then here you were, and then you took the reins, and instead of making wagons, you brought smiles and good memories. And
Mhm.
from that, you started developing all these other products, and sales just exploded. And now here you are, the CEO of this major, major company, which has been around for over 100 years. I mean, how many companies can say that they've been around over 100 years? Was that hard?
Hard to be around for 100 years?
Hard to be the CEO of a company for
Oh,
over 100 years.
I don't think it's hard. I mean, I love it. So I mean,
Mm.
there's a lot of challenges, of course, but um, I feel like, if you have passion for what you're doing, it's a lot easier to manage those challenges. If you don't really like it, then the challenges are really a drag.
So it sounds like you definitely liked it, and you definitely saw the challenge, and you were constantly looking for solutions along the way. This is incredible. This is an incredible, incredible story. So let's talk about these teams that you built, because when you stopped making wagons and started making memories and happy memories and childhood memories, it sounds to me like that it couldn't just be your vision. It had to be everyone's vision, the team's vision. So how many people are working at Radio Flyer?
Today, total in the company, about 130.
130. And these are now people, you had to get them on board with this new vision. Was that hard?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, I'll tell you one story about the team and kind of the from and the to. So in those early years, I said, just trying to learn as much as I could. So one of the things I would do very frequently was just walk around the building and talk to people,
Mm.
and ask questions and say what's wrong, what are the problems, and fortunately, from very early on, everybody talked to me because they knew me and they knew, my grandpa started the company. So I had great access to people. And one evening, I was walking through the warehouse and I had to use the bathroom. And when I walked in, I noticed there was this large puddle on the floor. And I looked at the ceiling to see if, there was a leak, but there wasn't. I squatted down to take a closer look at it. And then I smelled it. It was urine. And I thought, wow, that's strange. Why is there pee on the floor when there's a toilet literally 2 feet away? And so, so the next day I made it a point to walk by the bathroom a few minutes before 5 p.m. And out walked Steve, a quality inspector who had been at the company for 30 years. And I went in the bathroom and there it was, a fresh puddle of pee. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, what is going on here? And I went to the plant manager, Ray, who had been at the company for 25 years. And I told him the story. He said, oh, yeah, he does that because he's pissed. And Ray didn't intend the pun. He said he's pissed at the fact that I demoted him 10 years ago. And I said, he's doing this? Like, how can you let this go on? And that's when he said it. He's like, Robert, you're young. So let me give you a little bit of advice.
Uh-oh.
Sometimes you have to let little things like this go. Steve always does what I tell him to do, and he's got to vent this way, so what? It's not worth confronting.
Uh-oh.
And it just hit me over the head as I walked out of that office that like our culture had really become infected with entitlement and mediocrity, and people were disengaged.
Ooh,
And I realized at that moment, as harsh as it sounds, was that the people who had gotten us this far in the game were not the ones who were going to get us where I wanted to go and achieve the success that I imagined. And I realized that I was going to need to completely rebuild the team.
The whole "what got you here won't get you there."
Exactly that. Exactly. Perfectly said.
Did you say to him you were in trouble?
No.
Did you say I'm pissed?
No, in those days, I was just really like, oh, okay, wow.
Wow.
Because also I wanted to build trust with people, and I didn't want them to think, and I was very respectful. I mean, these guys had been running it for years, and it had been successful, and I was very thankful for that. Like, these are the people who paid for me to go through college, and so I just wanted to learn, and then I just realized, okay, well, not sure he's going to be, maybe he's going to need to have a little bit of an earlier retirement than he thought, or, something like that.
So what happened to him?
We retired. He retired. You're talking about the manager?
Yeah, the guy who was peeing on the floor.
The guy who was peeing on the floor, we had an early retirement. We had waves of these early retirements because also what had happened, because the company hadn't been growing for a number of years, all these people had these, like, the average years of employment when I started was 25 years. That was the average.
Wow.
So that was a lucky part of it, that we were able to gracefully part ways with a lot of people through early retirement and incentives and things like that.
Wow.
So you were able to pivot then, because last year you received the Glassdoor Employee Choice Award with 100% rating from your employees. So you really made a pivot from people peeing on the floor to obviously rating you with 100%. So how did you do that? I mean, that's
it took a long time. I mean, it took, the turnaround I'm describing to you was 15 years in the making, before I feel like we really got to a point where we were cranking. But we hired, we started hiring people. Like we didn't have an HR team. I didn't know how to hire anybody. I'd never hired anybody. And I made a ton of mistakes and read different books, tried different methods, hired different consultants. But we really, now we use the Who method for hiring, and everybody in the team is trained on it. We're really disciplined about our selection process, but probably one of the most important things we did was we developed this internship program. And when people say, what do you wish you had done earlier? That's one of the first things I always say, because I always thought, well, we weren't ready for an internship program because I hadn't gotten the team and the culture where I wanted to get it. But once we started building up this internship program, now 1 out of every 4 people who work at Radio Flyer was an intern.
Wow.
So, those are some of the ways we started to turn around the team. It was really getting the right people on the bus, to use Jim Collins' language.
And you want to tell what the Who selection process is?
Yeah, it's a book by Jeff Smart. And it's a very clear methodology for having a really disciplined process. And one of the most important things is that you don't do job descriptions, you do job designs. And so you articulate, what are the goals? What do we need the person to do in the job? And then try to find a match between the person and the job. But, we, even with the really disciplined process, we still get hiring wrong. And so we also have a very disciplined process after we hire people, where at 3 months and 6 months, we do a check-in with the manager and say, like, is this working? If it's not working, have you given that feedback? So we're not sitting there a year from now at their review saying, oh yeah, I hired this person, they're not really working out. So we spent a lot of time on the whole selection process.
So important to get the right people on the bus, as they say. And if they're not, have them go off the bus. And you hit my pet peeve with that the annual performance appraisals, where that's the first time you hear if you're doing a good job or not, which is really too little too late, because it's too late for the low achievers to really do anything about it because they're already set in their ways. And the high achievers realize that no one's paid them any attention for a year and they're already with one foot out the door. So you created this whole new team and they are all on board and you are getting them all together. And now tell me where these ideas for all these new products, because you went from creating one iconic product to now creating a suite of products. That is a completely different way of thinking. How did that come about? How did these ideas come about?
Yeah. Well, from a very early time, one of the things I fell in love with was just the brand and what Radio Flyer means to people. And I just thought, like, this is incredible. Like, to have a brand that people know and have all these positive associations with, like, if we can't figure out how to make that into something great, then I probably needed to have a different profession, so I really focused in on the brand early. And again, I asked consumers questions. So in that process of discovering what the brand means to people, we've discovered something really surprising early on. And people would always say, yeah, I had a Radio Flyer wagon, but sometimes they'd say, oh, I had a Radio Flyer tricycle. We say, oh, really? Wow. So what did it look like? They said, well, it was red. It had shiny chrome handlebars. It had a big bell on it. It had 2 steps on the rear deck. And it was a Radio Flyer. And we had never made tricycles before. So I was like, this is incredible. Like, this is, I use that as proof. Like, I told you, like, this brand is amazing. People think we made tricycles. So we did something really smart. We made this tricycle.
Wow. Follow the lead.
Yeah. The customers showed us the way, really. And the tricycle, we designed all those cues so it looked like what they remembered. And it became a great seller. And that was really my first product success. This was in the late 90s outside of wagons, where I realized, okay, this opens up a whole new product category for us that we weren't even in before. And that I felt like we could become best at designing and developing awesome kids products that inspire active play. That's how we started to think about it. Really also focusing on wheels, anything with wheels for kids.
Wow. I love that. Now, Debbie has done her research and she realized that March 30th is a special day at Radio Flyer. What's that about?
National Little Red Wagon Day.
What is that?
It's we established it about 6 years ago, and it's really just another way to get our message out about imaginative play, active play, getting in touch with your inner child. And so we do posts about it on social media. We have a big sale at radioflyer.com to celebrate it. So it's those sort of things.
Oh, well, we are definitely going to have to celebrate and help amplify the Little Red Wagon Day on March 30th. Now, we have been talking so much about color. Susie, I know you're probably burning with the question.
I am. I was thinking about all the products that nobody wants to get close to that their parents used. And I was just thinking about the visual and the visceral aspect of this Little Red Wagon. And when, I'm just imagining the thought bubble that goes over somebody's head and the intergenerational experience, because a little kid can't take the Little Red Wagon. They can take the tricycle, but it really kind of takes somebody to pull them. And then the shared stories, perhaps, of what that meant to them. And I'm really impressed the way that you've been able to take this and expand it in the way you are. And I'm thinking about the dialogue and the photographs and the warmth that may go around this. The other thing that I kind of flashed on was Snoopy, and is the Red Baron. Wasn't that plain red?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just imagining that kind of a correlation that might have happened in people's heads as well.
Yeah, and Calvin and Hobbes. The Calvin and Hobbes often were doing their adventures in a Little Red Wagon. But Susie, you might be surprised to know that one of our best-selling wagons is not red; it's gray.
Really?
Yes, it's a stroller wagon. So it's both. You can push it like a stroller, you can pull it like a wagon. It has lots of stroller-like features, and it's And I remember being in this meeting, and this is a great reason why we have to bring in a diversity of thought, because we had some young mom designers on the team, and they were saying, well, all the trends in strollers are gray, and if we want to be strollers, we think we should be predominantly gray. We'll still have the Radio Flyer logo on there and in red. And I was like, gosh, a gray wagon, that seems so radical. And like, it sounds funny outside of our building, but they're like, no, we really think so. I'm like, all right, let's try it. And so they proved me wrong. They're like, it's a great seller and people love it.
Well, look at you. You just gave them a safe space to take strategic risks.
Yeah, we try to do that a lot.
But that's how, you have to fail a certain number of times before you succeed so much. But what happens is, too often in many organizations, we're afraid to fail because we're afraid of repercussions. But you created this place where please try it. Please try it. We might hit on something. And it went against, that bright red that everyone is so used to, and everyone latches onto that red with the Radio Flyer iconic brand. And here you were, you tried something new and it was a hit. You did it.
Yeah. And we celebrate those a lot. And, every new group of employees, we call our employees flyers. We have our learning and development program is called Wagon U, of course. And I do a class called Breakfast with the CWO, and it's really a welcome to the company. And I spend a significant portion of the time talking about product failures that were my ideas specifically. And one of the ones I always talk about was that this little wagon right behind me here came from a call we got from Kraft Foods. They're here in Chicago too, and they wanted to buy, they said, 1 million little wagons used for promotion, so we made the wagon, the promotion fell through, but then we made it and it sold really great. And we noticed that people were putting dolls in this wagon. So I said, well, we need to do our own version of a doll in a wagon. At the time, Toys R Us was our biggest customer. And we were like, okay, we can get into another aisle at Toys R Us. We can expand our business and diversify. And so we created this whole backstory theme for a doll. Now, mind you, we had never done a doll. I didn't know anything about dolls. And we created this fancy commercial, like we were trying to be like Hasbro or Mattel. And we focus group tested it. Everybody thought it was amazing. And do you remember, have you heard of this doll called Angel Love Wagon Babies? I'll spare you. No, you haven't heard of it. It was the non-hit of the 1990s. It was a complete failure. And, I tell the story and I show the commercial and I was like, we were all in on this thing. And, that's when I've learned, and I've learned many, many times, like, I really don't know what's going to sell until we try something. And so we used the analogy of we've got to plant a lot of seeds to see what will grow.
That's so true. One of he was a guest on this show, and he's featured in my book, The Success Factors, Dr. Bob Lefkowitz, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2012. And every year he actually looks at all of the projects that his laboratory did and how many succeeded and how many failed. And if not enough projects failed, he said, we're not taking big enough risks.
That's great. Makes
So
a lot of sense.
Right? We have to take these strategic risks. Janice, I know you have a great question.
Yes, I love that you have the wagons in the hospital. So I work in disability access. So for me, that is so great, taking kids into a surgery room or transferring around the hospital. I'd love to hear the story behind that, because that's just fabulous.
Yeah, it's another example of really following the lead of what other people were doing. So, 20 years ago, we would just get calls from hospitals randomly, and we were just organically donating wagons to them so that they could be used instead of a wheelchair or a gurney, because they're more fun, less scary. And but then I became aware of an organization called the Starlight Foundation, which their whole mission is to help those kid stays in hospitals. And so I called them up and said, hey, we'd love to have help distributing these wagons. And so we committed to giving a certain number of wagons every year. We've donated over, I think it's 15,000 wagons, through the years. And we get all these amazing stories and photos, and they're really heartwarming. And it's just part of our purpose, that like when our team sees those and reads those stories, it's like, we know at Radio Flyer, like we're not curing cancer. We're creating a product that is, in some ways like a luxury, but we also are providing moments of joy, moments of meaning for families. And so our team started to notice as we got these pictures of the wagons in the hospitals that the hospitals were sort of jury rigging parts of the wagon, like to tie an IV pole onto the back of it and stuff. And they're like, and our designers, they're so passionate about great design and great engineering. They're like, we can do better than that. Like, we want to design a wagon that's specifically for this use. And so they started going into hospitals and observing how the wagons were used. And earlier this year, we came out with this wagon designed specifically for this purpose. We call it the Hero Wagon. And it's got all these cool little features that make it great for hospital use. And so we're continuing to partner with Starlight to get those into hospitals.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible.
I love that. It's just such a great story. When I've seen the pictures on LinkedIn, I thought that was phenomenal.
Yeah, it's something we all feel so great about and just love.
I love that. Now, we cannot end our show without talking about that statue that's behind you.
Oh, is that there?
I see an Emmy.
Yes, that is. I love to brag to my kids when they say something like, I'll critique a movie or something. They're like, oh, you know what you're talking about, Dad? I'm like, I'm an Emmy-winning producer. You got to remember that. Okay, so it was an animated short film.
Hey, don't minimize. Don't minimize. You have an Emmy. The rest of us don't have Emmys.
That was one of the most fun projects I've worked on so far. To celebrate our 100th anniversary 5 years ago, we partnered with this wonderful director, Brandon Oldenburg, and this great little animation studio to create a 5-minute Pixar quality animated short that really captures what Radio Flyer has meant in families through the years. And it was just it's a really heartwarming. It's called Taking Flight. You can see it on our website. It's really cute. It's really fun. And we were thrilled that we won an Emmy for this thing. It was so exciting.
Did you expect that?
I didn't expect it, but I really secretly hoped for it, but I didn't let on. And then when we got to the Emmys, we were at the daytime Emmys. So it's like the game shows and stuff. It's not like the primetime Emmys, but we're there. We got our tuxes on. I'm there with Brandon, the director, and they start going through the categories. And I start having this like, what am I thinking? There's no way we're going to win an Emmy. Like I started having really all this like self-doubt and kind of like, who do you think you are? Like, And then they called us and we went insane. Like Brandon had his daughter there and she came up on stage with us and it was just such a thrill.
We need to find video of that.
Really fun.
That is so awesome. And congratulations on that Emmy. And really it brings it full circle. Tell me what was COVID like for Radio Flyer?
Yeah, I mean, we were really lucky. We were, the beginning of it, we were really scared like everybody else. But what happened was as families couldn't spend money on travel and experiences and they were stuck at home, they bought a lot of our products to keep their kids active and entertained and engaged. So we had really, really strong sales. And we got all these stories from people like, my kids are bouncing off the walls and our favorite time of day is when we go for our tricycle races around the block or stories like that. So
around the living room,
around the living room or basement. And we just felt like we were a bright spot, during a tough time for families. So that felt really good.
Wow. And how great that you were still able to manufacture.
Yeah, the entire team did an amazing job.
Wow. Incredible.
So no wagon shortages.
No wagon shortages. No.
Excellent.
We are lucky. Robert, thank you so much for sharing your time with us, sharing your story with us. What an incredible journey. 3 generations, over 100 years of good memories, not stopping anytime soon. An incredible Emmy. The story, look, you hit on the high achievers, what they do, right? That's why you're here on the show. You hit the mark. Thank you very much. Thanks for telling us how you bring together this great team. You are so right. Culture is so important, and you got to get rid of that toxicity. My one tip, don't minimize those great achievements that you had. They're huge. It's an Emmy. Doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes or 5 hours. You got an Emmy.
Well,
Great job.
thank you. I've had a lot of help.
Thank you. And thanks for sharing your time with us and sharing your story. Next week, everyone, don't forget to join us for the next 2 weeks. We have two Olympic champions coming up. And next week we have the all-time greatest, most decorated Winter Olympian. And he won the mirror ball on Dancing with the Star. I'm talking about Apollo Anton Ono is joining us next week. We'll see you then. Bye, everybody.